The first time I saw the demolition notice taped to my late father's garage door, I thought it was a joke. A cruel, twisted joke that someone with too much time on their hands had decided to play on a grieving son. The garage stood like a monument to my father's life. 2 stories of weathered wood and faded paint, filled with decades of memories, tools, and what most people would call junk. To me, it was sacred ground. To the newly formed Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, it was an eyesore that needed to disappear. I pulled the notice off the door, my hands shaking with a mixture of grief and rage. The official letterhead read, Architectural Compliance Violation 001, in bold, unforgiving letters. Below that, a checklist of infractions. Structure exceeds height limitations, non-conforming exterior materials, deteriorating condition poses safety hazard, and the final nail in the coffin. Demolition required within 45 days. My name is David Chen, and 6 months ago, I inherited my childhood home after my father's sudden heart attack. Dad had been a mechanic for 43 years, and that garage was his kingdom. Every socket wrench, every oil-stained workbench, every rusted car part told the story of a man who could fix anything with enough patience and elbow grease. The house itself was a modest 3-bedroom ranch built in 1987, but the garage, that was something special. Dad had built it himself in 1989, back when the neighborhood was just a collection of working-class families who minded their own business. 2 stories, with a workshop on the ground floor and storage space above. It was where I learned to change oil, where I built my first go-kart, where Dad and I spent countless Saturday afternoons working on whatever project had captured his imagination. But times change, and so do neighborhoods. Over the past 5 years, Willowbrook had transformed from a blue-collar community into what the real estate agents called an up-and-coming area. The modest ranch homes were being bought up by young professionals who tore them down to build modern McMansions. Property values soared, and with them came the inevitable HOA. The woman who delivered the bad news was Margaret Thornfield, a sharp-featured real estate agent who'd moved to the neighborhood 3 years ago and immediately positioned herself as the voice of community improvement. She wore a crisp white blazer and carried a tablet that she consulted constantly, as if it contained the secrets of suburban perfection. "I'm sorry for your loss, David," she said, though her tone suggested she was more sorry about the garage than my father. "But you have to understand, we're trying to maintain property values for everyone. That structure is bringing down the entire block." I wanted to tell her that my father had paid off his mortgage 15 years early, that he'd never missed a property tax payment, that he'd been the guy everyone called when their lawnmower wouldn't start or their car was making strange noises. Instead, I just stared at the notice and tried to process what was happening. "There has to be some kind of grandfather clause," I said. "The garage was here long before any HOA." Margaret's smile was as cold as her blazer was white. "Actually, when the HOA was formed last year, all existing structures were subject to review. The garage failed to meet current architectural standards. I'm afraid there's no wiggle room here." That night, I sat in Dad's old recliner, staring at the garage through the kitchen window. The building looked the same as it always had. A little rough around the edges, maybe, but solid. Built to last. Like everything else my father had touched, I thought about the summers we'd spent in there. The smell of motor oil and sawdust, the way Dad's face would light up when he figured out a particularly tricky repair. I thought about the night before he died, when he'd called me rambling about some project he was working on, something about keeping the family legacy safe and important papers that he needed to organize. At the time, I'd assumed he was talking about his will or insurance documents. Dad had always been paranoid about paperwork, probably because he'd grown up poor and understood how quickly life could change. But as I sat there, processing the reality of losing the garage, I started to wonder if there was more to his final conversation than I'd realized. The next morning, I decided to fight back. But the real treasure wasn't the rare earth minerals beneath our feet. It was the community that came together to fight injustice, the neighbors who chose cooperation over competition, and the legacy of a man who taught us that sometimes the biggest victories come from the smallest acts of resistance. Margaret Thornfield thought she could bulldoze her way to a fortune, but she didn't understand what she was up against. She saw a neighborhood of individual homeowners who could be manipulated and exploited. What she found was a community united by shared values and a common purpose. The garage that she tried to demolish as an obstacle to her plans became the symbol of everything she couldn't understand or control. It represented family, community, tradition, and the idea that some things are more valuable than money. Today, when I walk through the neighborhood, I see children playing in yards where corporate lawyers once plotted to steal their families' futures. I see gardens growing where Margaret's shell companies once planned to drill for minerals. I see a community that's stronger because it faced a threat and chose to fight back together. The story of Willowbrook has been told and retold, inspiring other communities to stand up against corporate exploitation. We've received visits from residents of towns across the country who are facing similar threats, healing, and we've shared our strategies and experiences with anyone who asks. The Mineral Rights Cooperative has become a model for community-owned economic development, showing that ordinary people can take control of their own destinies when they work together. The annual profits from the mining operation have funded scholarships, community improvements, and local businesses that have created jobs and opportunities for everyone. But perhaps the most important lesson of our story is that you never know what treasures are hiding beneath the surface of an ordinary life. My father spent 40 years in that garage, fixing cars and helping neighbors, never fully understanding the wealth that lay beneath his feet. But he understood something much more valuable: the importance of community, integrity, and standing up for what's right. Margaret Thornfield saw the garage as an obstacle to her plans, something to be demolished and forgotten. But she couldn't see what my father had built there over the decades: relationships, trust, and a legacy of service that would outlast any corporate scheme. The demolition notice that started this whole story is now framed and hanging in the community center, a reminder of how close we came to losing everything. Next to it hangs a photo of my father in his prime, holding a wrench and smiling the way he always did when he'd figured out a particularly tricky problem. He would have been proud of what we accomplished, not because of the money we made, but because of the community we built. The garage that housed his life's work has become a symbol of resistance against greed, and a testament to the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change. Sometimes I stand in the workshop area, surrounded by his tools and the smell of motor oil that still lingers in the air, and I can almost hear his voice. "Son, the most important thing you can do is take care of your neighbors. Everything else is just details." He was right, of course. The rare earth minerals made us wealthy, but the relationships we built made us rich. The treasure that Margaret tried to steal was always right there on the surface, in the connections between neighbors and the shared commitment to doing what's right. The garage still stands, weathered but strong, a monument to the idea that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones we almost lose. It's a reminder that beneath every ordinary surface, there might be something extraordinary waiting to be discovered. But you have to be willing to dig a little deeper to find it. You have to be willing to look beyond the surface, to question the obvious, and to fight for what matters most. My father did that every day of his life, and in the end, his legacy saved not just his own family, but an entire community. The HOA tried to demolish our history, but they only succeeded in uncovering our future. They thought they knew what was valuable, but they had no idea what was really buried beneath the surface of our small corner of the world. The garage stands as proof that sometimes the biggest treasures are hidden in the most ordinary places, waiting for the right person to discover them. And sometimes all it takes is someone willing to stand up and say, "Not in my neighborhood." Margaret Thornfield learned that lesson the hard way. The garage she tried to demolish is now worth more than all her corporate schemes combined. But its real value isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the lives it's changed, the community it's built, and the legacy it represents. My father's garage has become our neighborhood's treasure, and every day it stands is a victory for the idea that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they work together. The demolition notice is long gone, but the spirit of resistance it inspired lives on in every community meeting, every shared meal, and every neighbor helping neighbor. In the end, the treasure was never really buried at all. It was there all along, in the community my father helped to build, the relationships he nurtured, and the values he passed down. The rare earth minerals were just the bonus. The real wealth was in the neighborhood that came together to fight for what mattered most. The garage that the HOA tried to demolish has become the most valuable building in Willowbrook, not because of what's buried beneath it, but because of what it represents. The power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change when they refuse to be silently pushed aside.